Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here are your co-hosts, Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah. Back again. Thanks, you guys, as always, for joining us. Second free pod this week. You guys know this by now. 2 free pods every week. We love it. We did quarterback battles for the spring on the pod earlier this week, and now, Shehan, it's a playoff show. We're doing the playoff. A year ago at this time, we did early playoff projections. We said 1 through 4, what we thought the seeds would be. Evolution of thinking, I think is important. This is perception. This is returning starters. This is schedule. This is vibe. This is coaching changes, because spring football has not yet informed us. So I like doing this kind of thing. We are going to give our projected playoff seeds 1 through 4, but let's go in the Wayback Machine. You want to see how dumb or not so dumb we were from a year ago?
Do I? I don't know. We gotta wait. I want to hear the answers first, and then I'll figure out whether we're gonna release this podcast.
Yeah, no, we'll freezing cold take ourselves. That's fine. We can do that. Our unanimous number 1 seed a year ago was Bama. We were like, I mean, it's Bama. They're probably mad that they lost the national title game. They're going to have the best offensive player and the best defensive player. We both picked Bama number 1. What did we get? Were we silly to do that last March, or was the whole world picking Bama and then they just had a goofy year?
Yeah, they had such a weird year. This was maybe the weirdest Bama year that I can remember, because it's one thing if a team is just not that good, but Bama specifically lost games in bizarre, weird ways. Obviously, they lost to LSU on a 2-point conversion. They lost to Tennessee because they kind of tried to force things and then let Tennessee set up a game-winning field goal to beat them for the first time since Nick Saban took over. But the funny thing about that is I think it's easy to look at that and say, oh, well, those were kind of fluky games. Those were kind of fluky losses. But they also had fluky wins. The Texas game, they shouldn't have won. That was so weird. Why couldn't they have beaten Texas A&M? You know, they have a pass into the end zone as time expires. And unfortunately, Jimbo Fisher can't drop a play to save his life in 2022. Ole Miss has the ball with a chance to go win the game. And, you know, Ole Miss can't throw at all. So that kind of cost them. But like, there were many games that Alabama could have lost that they didn't lose. And they could have won both of the games that they did lose. I don't know if this team was any good last year, or maybe it was great. And honestly, this makes it hard heading into this year to get any sort of feel of what I'm supposed to expect from Bama.
Odd year. And it does affect how you view Bama going forward. Not that they're not going to be good, but usually they're good and they lack goofiness. I think that's fair to say. There's been, I think, a real lack of goofiness in the Saban era. It's like, hey, here's who they have, here's what they're going to do, and then they go do it. And last year they had Bryce Young and Will Anderson, who both might go in the top 5 of this NFL draft, and they had the season that you just described. So I don't think we were silly a year ago. I think it turned out that Bama had a sillier season than anybody imagined they would. Unanimous number 2 seed for us a year ago, Ohio State. And I think we saw the offense. We talked a lot about the hire of Jim Knowles on the defense should be better. We knew they had the Notre Dame opener, but you didn't exactly know who was going to get them. We did not have a lot of belief in a Michigan playoff repeat the way we talked last March, so that was not holding us back from anything. So we got that playoff team, right? Kind of had a lot of weird stuff had to happen for Ohio State to get in, but then once Ohio State was in, they certainly looked like one of the 4 best teams in the country. What do you think of our Ohio State pick from last March?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the process of it was good. And I think that's what you have to judge, right? You have to judge if you were completely off or whether like things kind of went the way that they went. And, you know, like with Bama, like things happened and football's a crazy sport. I think the process was good. I think that Ohio State was clearly a top 4 team in the country, of course. But I mean, I don't think that either of us thought that what happened against Michigan last year was going to happen again. That was bizarre. You know, we've talked about it. Michigan deserves to be spoken about as the program in the Big Ten right now because of what they've done the last 2 years. But, you know, I don't think that was because of Ohio State's deficiencies. They just played a bad football game again for the second year in a row. And so it's less that I have questions about whether the sort of big picture situation of Ohio State has changed for me. And it's more, man, you got to go and win that game. Like, you got to go and win that game. And heading into this year, I think that's going to be the biggest question facing them, because Ohio State's probably going to be worse and Michigan's probably going to be better.
Stay tuned for more Michigan talk. Stay tuned for more Michigan talk. Now we diverge. And this is where we get to the thing you just said about, was the thought process good or not? My 3 seed was Clemson. Your 3 seed was USC. And we were both kind of oddly close. If Clemson doesn't lose to South Carolina in the last weekend of the regular season, they might make the playoff. Now, were they one of the 4 best teams? I don't know. That's not what the discussion is. It's a playoff show. It's not a 4 best team show. It's about who gets in.
I will say that they're not.
USC, if they beat Utah in the Pac-12 championship game, USC's in the playoff. And so I was reticent about jumping on the USC bandwagon in year 1 of Lincoln Riley. You were less so. I think our minds potentially, well, did you pick USC once we got to the start of the season? I think maybe you did hold on with that.
I think I did flip it.
So I think your thought process of, and I think we can compare these thought processes. 2 big-time programs undergoing huge change. USC got Lincoln Riley. Clemson lost Brent Venables and Tony Elliott, and we're replacing 2 coordinators. And even though we both were wrong, I think your thought process with USC was better than my thought process with Clemson, because my thought process with Clemson starting last March and all year was, I think they'll figure out quarterback. Either DJ Uiagalelei will be better or he won't be, and they'll get to Cade Klubnik. And then basically, once the season ended, Dabo Swinney said, yeah, maybe we should have gotten to Cade earlier. And I was like, well, yeah, maybe you should have. And maybe you would have beaten South Carolina, and maybe you would have been in the playoff. But USC looked like a better team over the course of the season. What do you think of your USC pick last March?
I think the USC pick ended up being really good. I mean, again, if Caleb Williams doesn't get hurt in the Pac-12 title game, then USC is the 4th playoff team. And really, again, when we're making these picks, again, you got to think about the process. And USC, the process was always that their offense was going to be so good and so overwhelming that it would cover up for a lot of their defensive issues. And that's generally what happened. A similar deal. They lost to Utah the first time in Salt Lake City on a 2-point conversion. If they get to stop that play, then they're still in the playoff. Now, again, this is a distinct conversation from whether they were a top 4 team in the country. I think that obviously their performance in the Cotton Bowl probably proved that they were not. But at the same time, I think that I was pretty much spot on with my USC expectations. And again, if not for some injury woes, I think that I probably would have been right.
And I think Dabo should have listened to me. So I think there were things that were in place. It's like, just get to the guy faster, man. Dabo, do it. You've done it before.
I will say, everybody talks about, oh, well, if we had changed to Cade just a little bit faster. And I'm a Texas guy. I watched Cade play. He's a great player. I don't think they beat Wake Forest in double overtime with a freshman quarterback. I don't think they beat Florida State with a freshman quarterback. I don't think they beat Syracuse with a freshman quarterback. So, you would have had to thread the needle absolutely perfectly in order to do that. And maybe that could have happened, right? I mean, Dabo threaded the needle perfectly with Trevor Lawrence back in 2018. It has happened before, but I am very hesitant to jump on the bandwagon that, well, all we needed was Cade Klubnik to play a lot more and that would have fixed everything, because Cade Klubnik had also several games where he was not very good.
Listen, Dabo is a 2-time national champion at Clemson. He is a professional needle threader. I'm not saying it would have been easy. I'm saying it could have been done.
I mean, did you watch him against Tennessee? Cade Klubnik was
good
not
on Clemson.
Good against
We're good on Clemson.
Okay.
It's okay.
Okay.
Let's move to the team. Who's the team that we didn't talk about yet? Georgia. So our 4th spot conversation, you kind of wanted to pick NC State, and I kind of wanted to pick Utah, and we didn't. And I did pick Baylor, which I feel like I get half credit for the TCU season. It's like I was in the right area.
I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair.
You picked Georgia. And I was just off Georgia of, I think they'll have a loss you don't see coming. They lost so many defensive guys to the NFL, and that was totally wrong. And so you at least got Georgia in the playoff, but certainly a year ago, we could have been saying, right? We could have been saying, hey, man, they're going to reload on defense. Stetson Bennett's back. Todd Monken's the guy. They have a great running game. Brock Bowers is awesome. I'm thinking repeat. And that is not the conversation that we had last March, but at least you did pick Georgia to make the playoff a year ago.
No, and the only reason that I had them as a 4, I thought that they'd go 12-0 through the regular season. I just thought that they'd run into the 1 seed in the SEC championship game in Alabama. And really, I think that heading into last year, I would have said just whoever wins that game is going to be the 1 seed, and whoever loses that game is going to be the 3 or the 4 seed. So I think that, again, I with the information that I had at the time, I don't feel too bad about that pick. Honestly, I don't feel too bad about any of my 4 picks. Looking back in hindsight, thank goodness I didn't pick NC State, and Lord knows, thank goodness I didn't pick Baylor for that 4th spot. But I think that that's what it comes down to is, look, if Georgia had gone 12-1 and Alabama had gone 13-0, then I think that it would have worked out something a little like this. And it just turns out Georgia was that dominant team and not Alabama.
Okay, so that's recapping how close we were. In the end, you were better than me. We were okay. I don't think it was a ridiculous discussion that we had, but we did underestimate Georgia and Michigan as teams who then made the playoff again. And so we did underestimate that. Will we underestimate them again? Let's make our picks for this playoff season next on the College Football Survivor Show.
Previously on the College Football Survivor Show.
Would you like to guess what did not happen in this defensive draft? Is there something that stands out that did not happen?
No, are you referring to something?
No Oklahoma players drafted. Did you even have an Oklahoma player on a list anywhere? Nowhere. We took 5 Oklahoma players in the offense draft. They were the second most represented offense. I forgot their nickname during the course of the defense draft. I was like, the Okies? What are they again? Just not even a thought, right?
Okay. Okoronkwo, nice player who I'd never considered. I don't know.
He's the guy whose name I at least wrote down.
Catch the latest episode of the College Football Survivor Show wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, Shehan, these are the teams that in the 9-year history of the playoff, have made the playoff multiple years in a row. Clemson made it 6 straight years from 2015 through 2020. Alabama made it 5 straight years from 2014 through 2018, and then made it back-to-back years again in 20 and 21. Oklahoma made it 3 straight years from 2017 to 2019. Ohio State made it back-to-back in 19 and 20. Georgia made it back-to-back the last 2 years. Michigan made it back-to-back the last 2 years. So there's some nice back-to-backs. But only 3 teams have made it done it 3 times in a row, which if we're going to talk about Georgia and Michigan, that's what we're talking about. It was Clemson and Bama dominating the playoff. And then, by the way, Oklahoma also did it. So I want to ask you a question to start this conversation. And when we look at Georgia, Michigan, TCU, and Ohio State, the 4 playoff teams from last year, shorthand answer to get us started. Do you believe Georgia will be better or worse this year?
Worse.
Do you believe Ohio State will be better or worse this year?
Worse.
Do you believe TCU will be better or worse this year?
Way worse.
Do you think Michigan will be better or worse this year?
Better.
Is Michigan going to win the national title?
No.
Okay. This is where my conversation starts because I am wrapped in an enigma and rolled in mustard. I don't know what to do because I think I have some views on who the best teams might be. I have views on paths to the playoff, but I think I might believe that we are preparing for the absolute best of Michigan. And that starts with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback as a returning starter. It starts with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards forming the best running back tandem in the country. It includes Michigan in Bill Connolly's SP Plus rankings of returning production, being 5th in the nation in returning production. They have a good linebacker group. They have all their safeties back. They have 2 legit corners. They have Chris Jenkins at defensive tackle. They always have good edge guys. They have 2 really good interior offensive linemen recruiting, and they went in the portal again to help the offensive line. Last year, when they went in the portal for the offensive line, they found the best center in the country. They have a legit tight end. Cornelius Johnson's a 6'3" receiver who's back and ready to be a number 1 receiver. Yes, they lost Matt Weiss as the quarterback's coach and co-offensive coordinator in kind of a goofy situation there, but Sharon Moore is back, and they did not lose Jesse Minter as a defensive coordinator, who maybe reportedly finished second in the Philadelphia Eagles defensive coordinator job. And they have an easy schedule, and they have Ohio State at home. I think the path is there. I think the talent is there. I think the coaching is there. I think the skill guys are there to a greater degree than we've seen at Michigan. I think the offensive line will be there. I think what Sharon Moore does there and the guys they bring in, I think that's almost a sure thing. I think there is a depth of talent defensively. And I would like to tell you why I have Michigan as my number 1 seed in the playoff. Now, does that mean I'm sure that Michigan's going to beat Ohio State for a 3rd straight year? No, it does not mean I'm sure of that. But they do get them at home, and there's a lot to like about this Michigan team. I do think we are seeing peak Michigan. I think they will be a better team than the team that made the playoff the last 2 years. Does that mean they'll win more games, that they'll advance farther in the playoff? Not necessarily. But I think they'll be a better team. I also think Ohio State might be more prepared mentally, emotionally, physically, schematically, everything for this Michigan game than they've been the past 2 years. And I think that Ohio State-Michigan game is going to feature 2 of the best 4 teams in the country. Does it mean they'll both make the playoff again? I don't know. There's a lot of maneuvering and logistics and what happens everywhere else that matters here. But I have Michigan number 1. Why not?
It's hard to argue. I will say I do not have Michigan number 1. I have them in my amorphous group. I'm still trying to piece together because I do want to have some discussion about this. I will say Georgia's my number 1 team. They're the 2-time reigning national champions. They just have enough coming back that I think that they deserve that spot. I don't even know that we need to make too much of an argument about it because
there's an argument. I'm going to be making an argument. Go ahead.
We can get to it. But I will say I feel like the Michigan discussion has to go along with the Ohio State discussion, because to me, that is Michigan's path. They have to beat Ohio State. There's no other pathway. It is a 1-game season for them. Now, I will say more than last year, on the road against Penn State is very intriguing. I think that's a real game, whereas last year it wasn't really. But this is, to me, for both Ohio State and Michigan, a 1-game season. Really, almost nothing else matters except for this game. And so
I disagree. I disagree from an Ohio State perspective on that.
Okay, that's fair. No, and I mean there is another interesting game that I think that we'll get to. But being around Ohio State, and again, like I said, I think they're going to be worse. They're not going to bring back CJ Stroud. They're losing a couple of key players. How confident do you feel about where Ohio State is when you look at where Michigan is and the fact that the game is going to be played in Michigan?
So I think Ohio State has to and will have a better emotional and mental approach to the Michigan game. I've sort of been on the record. I think the Michigan win in 2021 was football. Yes, it was at home, but that was Aiden Hutchinson. That was David Ojabo. That was Blake Corum and that offensive line in the run game. That was Michigan scheming up Ohio State and out footballing them. And I don't think that was a rivalry win. I think that was a football win. I think last year was a rivalry win. I think in Columbus all year, Ohio State thinks about it all year. They gear up for this. They're trying to be this physical team all year in the run game to match Michigan. Then they blow a bunch of coverages. Michigan has a plan to have J.J. McCarthy attack them down the field. I think that was a rivalry win. So they got to get the rivalry stuff figured out. And I think they will. But then we go back to the football. And Michigan, I think Michigan is really good. Now, the difference factor here is, again, it's the same thing with all this stuff. path, schedule, how you get there, what it means. Do you want an easy path? Do you want a tough path? Do you want credit for your resume? Do you want fewer chances of getting tripped up? Ohio State has road games at Notre Dame and at Wisconsin. Those are two real top 25, maybe more, road tests. Ohio State gets Penn State at home. Michigan gets Penn State at Penn State. But that's three teams that Ohio State's going to play. That's one team that Michigan's going to play. Michigan, once again, has nobody in the non-conference. This is not a non-conference conversation at all for Michigan, just like last year. East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green. And then they start in Big Ten play Rutgers, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan State. And then they're bye. Michigan is in a very similar position, I think, to Georgia. And Ohio State's more in a similar position to Alabama. That you can look at Georgia and Michigan and be like, I don't know, man. Who's going to beat them until they face this other team? Now, Michigan's going to face Ohio State in the regular season. Georgia wouldn't face Alabama into the SEC title game. But do you have to, with both Georgia and Michigan, say, no matter how good they are, no matter how easy their paths are, do they have to beat that other team to make the playoff? And so I think I'm agreeing with you on what I think part of what you're saying is, which is just like last year, Ohio State will have more of a resume that if Ohio State loses to Michigan, they have a better path to the playoff than Michigan does if Michigan loses to Ohio State. And that's just schedule. That's not how good you are. That's just schedule. But what if Michigan absolutely looks like the best team in the country all year? Because as we talked on our quarterback battle podcast earlier this week, Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State. Michigan's the only one returning a starting quarterback. What if they look the part and they are blowing people out and then they play a great game against Ohio State and Ohio State beats them by a field goal? I know the resume wouldn't get them there, but the eye test might. I think there's a chance. I think Ohio State and Michigan could both make the playoffs still.
I think that's definitely possible. I just wonder how Michigan could have the eye test if they have 1+ win the entire season. Because this would be, a horrible resume. Penn State is a legitimate game. I think Penn State is going to be a top 10, top 15 team, maybe even on the edge of the playoff. I think that would help them out a lot if Penn State was awesome. But what's the second win on that schedule? Are you bragging about Purdue?
You don't believe. So isn't eye test and resume different things, though? Eye test is they beat everybody 48-3. And every week the committee comes on and says, Michigan is the best team. They are the most balanced team. They're explosive offensively. They're solid and aggressive defensively. They're well coached. The metrics support it. Their schedule they have not been tested as much as other teams, but they are taking care of business and dominating the opposition they face. Michigan is our number one team. And every week, who's the guy this year? Who's the playoff? Is it?
It's Boo Corrigan again. Right? It's
Boo Corrigan again. Boo Corrigan every week. The first 5 times they have the show, Michigan's number one. Michigan's number one. Michigan's number one. And then Michigan loses to Ohio State, and they decide, well, we're not going to completely forget about it because we think they're one of the 4 best teams in the country. That's what it would have to be. It's not going to be resume. It's not resume, of course.
Yeah, but then I don't know, and maybe we're gonna have to kind of wait and see what happens in the room. But if you beat a bunch of bums and then falter against the only real good team that you play, then doesn't that throw everything else into question? Whether you actually did anything? But
did you falter, or did you just play a really good team and you played a really good game and you lost? I mean, you can't get your doors blown off. But if Ohio State and Michigan play a high level game, then I don't know. We know what their schedule stinks. We know that. So I'm trying to figure out, you don't think. So let me ask this. We're making predictions here. Do you have Michigan in the top 4 or no?
Right now, I do. But this is a fluid process. I'm not committing because I want to have this conversation. Right now, I do, but I don't feel good about it.
Okay. So, and it's because, do you think Michigan talent coaching will be one of the 4 best teams in college football in 2023?
I think that they easily have a pathway to it. Now, my question is, so last year, like you said, was a rivalry win. That's what it was. It was a mental game. It was an Ohio State shot themselves in the foot 3 times in that game. if you talk about like the actual on-field product, I think that the 2021 team was substantially better than the 2022 team. And I expect that the 2023 team is going to be substantially better than the 2022 team. I'm curious. I'm curious. I don't know that I can get all the way there to be confident. I'm curious whether 2023 ends up being better than 2021, because I think that there's more of a depth of talent. My question, I think, heading in is, are there the superstars? Are there, at the running back position, absolutely. That's not in question. But 2021, I think, this group is probably better, but it's not like another planet. Like Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum was a really good combination in 2021. Defensively, they had the best edge rushing combo in the entire country that year in Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo. Last year, they were very good defensively. They were very solid defensively. They were not as dynamic defensively because they didn't have guys like that. And heading into 2023, that's kind of part of my question about whether they have true 2021 football guaranteed upside is, do they have those dynamic players? Because like you said, they're going to have good edge rushers. That's not in question. And I'm not saying they have to have Aiden Hutchinson to be a good team. But my question is, do they have a trump card against the elite teams in college football on the defensive side of the ball or on the offensive side of the ball in some ways? I mean, they've got those running backs, but I think that that's a legitimate question to have.
Well, I think J.J. McCarthy has a chance to be one of the 5 best quarterbacks in college football.
I definitely don't think that's. I think
there's more upside there. I think Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards have a chance to be 2 of the 5 best running backs in college football. I really like Donovan Edwards. I think Cornelius Johnson is a legit number 1 receiver. I'm not saying he's Quentin Johnston, but this is a big guy who can make big plays. I think that's different. That's different than, they didn't have those receivers. They had receiver injuries in 2021. I think the offensive line will be good. I think Will Johnson and Mike Sanderstill at corner are going to be 2 of the better corners in the Big Ten. They're deep at safety. Junior Colson's one of the best linebackers in the Big Ten. They brought in this Ernest Hausman guy at linebacker from Nebraska, who's one of the bigger gets in the portal. I think Chris Jenkins has a chance to be one of the best defensive tackles in college football. And David Ojabo, in the offseason before 2021, we didn't know who he was. And so I do think there's a chance that there are guys in there. I think they have a chance. Mike Morris was good last year, but like they weren't as dynamic. I think there's some guys sitting in there that could become, not Aiden Hutchinson, but they develop guys there now. Like this is a program that develops guys defensively and has a plan of how they want to use them. So I just believe in a lot of what they do. I think they will be the best combination of offense and defense that they've been in this 3-year run. And I don't think anybody's going to get in their way. And I think they figured it out. Like, I think they've figured it out, man. And in a world where, Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State are trying to find their quarterback, I don't have a lot of doubts about JJ. I think there's a lot of upside there. I think he learned a lot of tough lessons on the fly last year. I think they will let him go more this year. They really had a governor on him a year ago. So I think we're good. That's probably the Michigan discussion we need to have. I'm not going to make my Ohio State-Michigan prediction for the last Saturday in November now. My assumption is that Michigan and Ohio State, based on talent and coaching, not based on schedule and path and logistics and maneuvering, will be 2 of the 4 best teams in college football. I don't know who that means, who I think is going to win that game. I don't exactly know what I think that means about can both make the playoff, because Ohio State needed a lot of help to get in last year. But I think the Big Ten, I think they're going to be 2 of the 4 best teams.
I do need to address, because 2 parts of this. One, I think that this pick and picking them number 1 necessitates you making a pick, not your final pick, but a pick of that game, because Michigan has no path to certainly number 1 without beating Ohio State. And I think that they have a very difficult path to making the playoff if they lose to Ohio State. They have to win that game. Like you said, in a way that Ohio State probably doesn't, though I think it's very important that they win that game too, not just for their playoff case, but also just for Ohio State as a program right now. The second thing is I have way more questions than you about J.J. McCarthy. I mean, he completed half of his passes against Ohio State. He threw 2 pick sixes that cost him the game against TCU. This is not been a quarterback who's been consistent in any sort of way. Now, he's been explosive. That's something that he's given Michigan over Cade McNamara. But I need to see down-to-down consistency, and we haven't seen that at any point from JJ McCarthy, and I think that he needs to be that.
But do you have more belief in the Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State quarterback situations than you do in JJ McCarthy? Why? JJ McCarthy's a 5-star who's played. These other teams have 5 stars who have never played.
He's played average, and I get it. Like, I mean, I would absolutely take whatever Ohio State's throwing out there at quarterback next year over what Michigan has at quarterback, because I trust what they do with their quarterbacks and I trust their system more. And I think that Michigan is kind of asking JJ McCarthy to just go out there and be great. And I don't think that he is. I don't think that he is yet. Now, that can change. I'm not saying that he's a finished product by any means, but I have a lot of legitimate questions. And I think that that does absolutely impact the way that I see Michigan's upside, is how confident I am that JJ McCarthy is going to be that player. I'm just not confident in it right now.
I think Michigan has gained a lot of trust in how they've gone about it the last 2 years. So I have a lot of faith. The Matt Weiss thing is weird.
Very weird.
I have a lot of faith in just how in Michigan's process right now. So sure. I think you can see the talent, and I think you can see the results of the process. So I didn't have a lot of trouble getting here, other than like, does this mean I'm picking Michigan at home to beat Ohio State when I know who Michigan's quarterback is and I don't know exactly who Ohio State's quarterback is? Here in early March, as Ohio State is one practice into their quarterback battle, I guess I'll pick, if you're going to make me, I'll pick Michigan to beat Ohio State at the beginning of March, with waiting to see what Ohio State looks like.
To be fair, I probably was a little bit more confident in Ohio State before one of the quarterbacks competing for their starting job said he idolized Tate Martell. I don't feel quite as good anymore.
If you saw a video of that was me screaming after he said that.
Really? I did.
Devin Brown was, you can see the top of my head in the video. I think I saw a bald spot. Devin Brown said, I grew up going to Tate Martell's camps, and I went, oh! And Devin Brown was like, why is this old man screaming? And I said, that's a magic name around here, Tate Martell. So then Devin Brown had to have like a 5-minute conversation off to the side with me about Tate Martell when things were done. So you just sometimes people say names and you got to yell. Okay, so I have Michigan number 1. You think you have Michigan in your top 4, but we're both kind of talking our way through this. You have Georgia number 1.
I do.
Why?
Well, we are a playoff show. You might know Georgia's won the last 2 of these things. But more seriously, Georgia's defense last year was really young. They bring back a lot of production on the defense side of the ball. Their defense was good last year, and certainly they're going to miss Jalen Carter a whole lot. But they have some guys, especially in that defensive backfield, who I think are only going to get better.
Six of their top 11 guys in snaps on defense last year were first or second year players.
Yeah, which is crazy for a team like Georgia. Malachi Starks is somebody who came in and provided an instant boost. I just think that Georgia has kind of like defensively, they've kind of perfected this thing. Like they just have a process and a system and a development strategy that even when they lose guys as good as Jalen Carter, they have so many players who have also played for them that it's not like you're worrying about experience or worrying about development. They are so good. To bring another Texas kid into the fold, Bear Alexander on the defensive line is a kid from out here. He is going to be insane. He is going to be absolutely ridiculous for them at defensive tackle next year. I'm very excited to watch him. So defensively, I have very few questions. I think, again, they're going to be, even better in the secondary than maybe they have been last year and maybe even the year before that, because they were kind of inconsistent at times in the secondary. And offensively, look, they certainly have questions at quarterback. And I actually probably have as many questions at offensive coordinator as I do as quarterback. Todd Monken was such a big part of what they did, but they've got a great offensive line. I think that they've got a strong running back room overall. They have maybe the best offensive player in the country, or at worst top 3 in Brock Bowers, who I think is going to make that transition a little easier. I expect them to stick with a very heavy tight end game despite losing Darnell Washington, because I think that they've realized that is a a huge mismatch these days in college football if you do have these freaks who can move around like it's nothing and still block at a high level. So I think that they're going to have a lot of time to figure out that quarterback position because they also don't play anybody during the regular season hardly. I mean, Tennessee should be pretty good, but like that's kind of it. Florida is still kind of a mess right now. They don't have, I think, a peer until they play in the SEC championship game. And at that point, I have more faith at this point in Georgia than I do in LSU, than right now I do in Alabama. And especially if you give them 13 games, I think by game 13, they're going to have that quarterback position sorted out and having that guy playing at a high level. So I think that Georgia's process remains good. I do think that I am less confident than most that Georgia's actually going to be the team that wins the national championship next year. But I do think that they will be the number one seed.
So there were times when Stetson Bennett went out and won games for Georgia.
Totally.
Right? The Missouri game last year, he leads 2 touchdown drives at the end of the game when they're down 10 to lead that comeback. He's like 7 of 9 on the 2 drives to do that. And I have real questions about matching the Todd Monken Stetson Bennett combo with Mike Bobo and guy who wins the job. Whether it's Carson Beck, who's a 4th-year guy who looks good in the pocket but isn't as mobile as Stetson Bennett, whether it's Brock Vandegrift, who's a 5-star guy who runs around better, but do you think he'll stand in there and do what he needs to do the way Stetson Bennett did it? And they will get back, right? First national championship, it's a defense-first team. They're struggling with the quarterback position all year. The defense leads them. Last year, as we said, going into the playoff, they actually were an offense-first team a year ago. They're going to be back to being a defense-first team, right? Kamari Lassiter, Malachi Starks, Javon Bullard, Smell Mondin, it's going to be Dumas Johnson. We get it, right? It's going to be ridiculous. But they're still going to need the offense to bail them out at some point somewhere. And I don't know. I don't know. Now, I have Georgia second. And it's almost entirely because they don't play anybody. And I don't know who's going to get them. And then I don't know what the SEC title game means. So again, a lot of this conversation, we have to have a playoff conversation that is slightly more sophisticated than pick the winner of Ohio State, Michigan, pick the winner of the SEC championship game between Bama and Georgia. Although maybe we don't. Maybe that is the whole conversation. And we could have a conversation of, could those be your 4 playoff teams? Could those be your 4 playoff teams? Could those be the 4 best teams? And then logistically, everything, the losers build up enough capital during the course of the season. The games are close enough that the loser of the SEC title game and the loser of the Ohio State Michigan game are now seeds 3 and 4. I don't think that's impossible. I'm not saying it's what I did, but I think it is a very similar conversation, Shehan, because again, Michigan and Georgia don't play anybody, but then you look at Bama, they're going to play Texas, they're going to play LSU, right? They're just going to have more tests, just like Ohio State is. So what does that mean? If Bama and Ohio State lose, I think this might be what it is. Undefeated Georgia and Michigan, 1 loss Alabama and Ohio State, welcome to your playoff. If that's not how it works, then it gets more difficult. But how similar do you think those circumstances are?
I think they're similar. I think they're similar for sure. We're going to, I think, have a Bama discussion maybe right after this. So, I feel more confident in Georgia being better than Alabama than I do in Michigan being better than Ohio State. That's probably like the one wrinkle to this. But no, I mean, there is absolutely a pathway to this being the 4 teams. To these being the 4 best teams in the country, to them all having 1 or fewer losses. I think that's absolutely a possible pathway. I don't think I'd pick it. I'm not there quite as yet. But I'll tell you what, if you wanted to go to Vegas and make some money, this is the bet, right? This is the bet that these are the 4 playoff teams. That's one of the safest bets you're going to find in college football. So I think that there's absolutely a pathway to it. But like I said, I think it has to be not Michigan beating Ohio State and Ohio State having 1 loss. I think that, here's a question, I guess, is with Georgia, can they afford to lose any games if they don't win the SEC?
Right. Can they afford another loss other than losing to Bama in the SEC title game.
Right.
Could they be a two? I don't think so, which is why I didn't pick them to make the playoff last year, because I had Bama as the number 1 seed and I thought somebody would bite them.
Sure.
And then nobody did. But again, we just went through. I mean, like they had moments where they could have lost. And then it turns out that Bama doesn't get there. So I don't want to sit here in March and not have the 2-time defending national champion in my playoff. But sure. I have real concerns about losing Todd Monken. And I have concerns about that. I have questions about how they're going to figure out the quarterback position. Not necessarily concerns, but I could see them picking the wrong guy, making a change in week 3. Oh, do we wind up kind of playing 2 guys for September? I don't know that it's going to be obvious. And I'm basically defaulting to them at number 2 here because of their schedule. But I don't feel strongly about this other than the fact that they're 2-time defending champs.
And I will say, you look at their schedule, again, I feel more confident that Georgia can blow through their schedule than probably anybody else in the country because, yes, it's not a very good schedule, but it's also just so many bad matchups for those other teams on Georgia, right? Like Tennessee is, I think, going to be a good team next year. I think they could be a top 10 to 15 team for sure. Also, I don't think they have anything for Georgia. I think that they are a horrible matchup. I think that they'll get bowled over. I think that they just can't hang. And so Georgia will get to pick up a potential top 15 win that way. And maybe, that's kind of what it's been for Michigan against Penn State the past couple of years too. So maybe it'll be kind of similar that way. But at Auburn, like Auburn's a mess right now. Florida's a mess right now. And they just apparently lost maybe a top 5 pick in the draft at quarterback. South Carolina, I just can't get there. They do have that explosive potential. And the thing that I do like about South Carolina is that they are the 3rd game of the year, the first SEC game of the year after Georgia's only played UT Martin and Ball State. But I just don't think that South Carolina can get all the way there against Georgia. I think that they can give them a scare, but probably not actually beat them. And I mean, like Kentucky is worse Georgia. That the way that they build their team is worse Georgia. Ole Miss, what they're going to run on Georgia? Come on. Like, I just don't see the vision of how really anybody could beat them, even if Georgia does take a step back.
This is what happens when the defending national champ comes from a not very good conference. So that's what just happens. Right? I mean, it's one of those things. Oh, it's the SEC. And then you go through and it's like, oh, right. Nobody can play with Georgia.
There are 3 teams. That's weird. There's only Alabama, Georgia, and LSU. And, that's it. That's kind of the whole deal.
Okay. So we both have Georgia in. I have Michigan in. You think you have Michigan in. Let's have an Ohio State conversation here. Do you have Ohio State in?
Right now, I have them teetering on the edge between 4 and 5. They are the team that I am most probably interested in trying to figure out. Actually, them or Alabama. I really have no good feel for either of those teams right now.
So I have Ohio State 3.
Okay.
And I think Ohio State, as we talked about, they'll be able to build up a better resume with some road wins at Notre Dame and Wisconsin. I think they'll be tested in those games, but I think they'll win. I think they'll figure out the quarterback position one way or the other between Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. And we did talk. I went to Ohio State practice on Tuesday. We talked to both quarterbacks, and I think that'll be a good competition. I think it is open. Kyle McCord is a year older, has played a little bit more, but I do think it is an open competition. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. and Mecca Buka, Julian Fleming will make up the best receiver core in the country. I think they'll be better at running back if they don't have a bunch of injuries again. They have real concerns on the offensive line. They don't know who their tackles are going to be. And none of the guys competing at tackle are huge 5-star recruits or anybody with much experience. So replacing 2 guys who could be first-round draft picks at tackle, that's a big deal. And then Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator, was talking about like all the things that kind of he didn't do well last year. So they have things to fix. They're gonna work on things differently. He thought he spent too much time teaching last year and not really like developing guys. I think he feels like he put some guys in the secondary on islands too much. So every time they gave up a big play, it wasn't a 25-yard play. It was a 75-yard touchdown. And so it was pretty eye-opening. I appreciated that Jim Knowles was sort of saying, hey, this is the things that we need to get better at. They were better defensively last year than they were the year before. But, as you saw against Michigan and Georgia, they weren't good enough, especially giving up explosive plays. So I do think there is a chance to be improvement there. I think that there's a chance that their cornerback situation is a lot better. So I think Ohio State has a chance to win the national title. I do. And I think there's a world where Ohio State goes to Ann Arbor, loses to Michigan for the third time in a row, and then wins the national title. Because I think the thing at the moment remains for me, which is that they're just a little more prepared to go out into the world in the playoff than they are to play Michigan right now. Doesn't mean they can't beat Michigan. But Michigan's good and Michigan's at home. But given the resume I think they'll build up, the areas where I do think they will improve, they will miss C.J. Stroud, they will miss Paris Johnson, they will miss DeJuan Jones. But that receiver room is nuts. I think they're going to be very good again, and then it's hard to analyze the Ohio State-Michigan game in March. But I have Ohio State as my 3 seed and Michigan as my 1, and I guess that's Michigan being the Big Ten champs at 13-0, and Ohio State being 11-1 with a loss to Michigan.
So offensively, like you said, I'm actually pretty excited about how well I think Ohio State's going to be able to run the ball next year. I mean, Mayan Williams coming back, I think, is a big deal. Those other guys got some really important experience, I think. Hopefully, we'll finally get to see a full Travion Henderson season where we get to kind of enjoy him. And I think that it's also going to be big for him to kind of get to play off of these other guys. I don't think that he at his best is sort of an all-purpose workhorse running back. I think that the fact that he has other guys there is exciting to me. The tackle situation is concerning to me, like you said, because they had probably the best tackle situation in all of college football last year, you could argue, with 2 guys who are projected to go very high in the NFL draft. Quarterback, we talked about it on the show earlier this week. It's just one of those things where you feel like the floor is so high because of the system they have in place, the development, the caliber of recruits that are obviously competing for this job, Ryan Day as a quarterback whisperer, and obviously those receivers are just ridiculous, just absolutely ridiculous. So offensively, I don't have too many questions if they can figure out the tackles, and they're going to have a little bit of time to do it. Certainly that Notre Dame game is going to be coming up early on that schedule, and it's going to be a test. Defensively, I liked a lot of what Ohio State did last year. Michigan game aside, I thought that they showed real improvement. They were a really solid unit. And again, I mean, some of those plays in the Michigan game were literally just a cornerback being like, what's my job again? What am I doing here? It's just such a mental mistake that I don't think is a coaching mistake or an ability mistake. I think that Ohio State looked at times that, I mean, you watched them closer than I did, certainly.
It's inexcusable to give up as many big plays, whether it's a missed tackle or a missed assignment or 2 guys running into each other on a mesh route or whatever.
Sure.
Like, there were just too many breakdowns across the board that I think is some combination, and I think does get back to coaching. Like, they weren't prepped for it. It was often not, dudes, hey, you're not fast enough to cover this guy, or you got mossed by this guy that you just weren't a physical matchup. It was not that. It was blown coverages and missed tackles that instead of being a 20-yard gain were 75-yard gains. So I think they need to shore that up schematically and from a coaching standpoint.
Sure. And I think that Jim Knowles is going to understand better what his team is capable and not capable of probably heading into year 2 than he will in year 1. And I think that that's only going to help. I mean, Jim Knowles is a coach that historically gets better the longer that he's with the program. And so I expect that to happen. Probably my one concern defensively is I really like you said, sort of the top end guys at defensive back. I'm curious about the depth. That's probably something that I think they're going to have to continue to develop. But I mean, the pathway is there, right? The pathway is there for Ohio State to be really good, to be not just as good as last year, but maybe even better than last year if some things break right. They don't have the superstar quarterback, I think, and I think it's very unfair to expect one of these guys to turn into CJ Stroud, but what's going on around him could be even better than what Stroud had last year. So this is such an interesting team, team, because the ceiling really is being the best team in college football by a good margin, and the floor is losing to Michigan again. So they play Notre Dame on the road week 4. That's going to, I think, be a really good test for them. let's go into a Notre Dame discussion because I do think that they're going to be. Yeah.
Hold on 1 second. Before we do that, is Ohio State in your playoff right now? Or are you still molding?
Right now, I have both Ohio State and Michigan in my playoff.
Okay. So at the moment, we've talked about Georgia, Michigan, and Ohio State, and we both have all three of them in.
Yeah.
That's only one spot left.
I know.
So before we go into Notre Dame, let's take our last break, and now it gets complicated. We'll do that next on the College Football Survivor Show. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. All right, Shehan, you want to do it. Do you want to talk about Notre Dame because you think Notre Dame is a real playoff contender?
I think they have a real ability to pop. Now, I don't know. I mean, again, they play Ohio State in week 4. And to be a playoff team, they probably have to beat Ohio State. And they have Ohio State, USC, and at Clemson on their schedule. This is going to be a
just like last year.
A ridiculously tough road. But in the second half of last season, I think that they started to pull some things together. I don't love that they lost Tommy Rees, offensive coordinator, but I feel pretty good about what they have coming back. And then, by the way, they add Sam Hartman at quarterback. Sam Hartman, the ACC's all-time leading touchdown thrower at Wake Forest. And they have never had a quarterback like this really since, I mean, is Jimmy Clausen even he might be better. I think he might be a better college player than Jimmy Clausen. Like, we're talking like Brady Quinn. That's the last time that Notre Dame has had a quarterback like this. They've also, I think, addressed the receiver position in the last 2 recruiting classes in a way that we never saw under Brian Kelly. They still are dynamic defensively. They were really good last year. I don't know if I'm ready to say that this team is ready to be a playoff team with how tough their schedule is, because they have to win 2 of 3 against Clemson, USC, and Ohio State. But I don't know. This is going to be a really exciting team.
So that's a good name to throw into the mix. Let me throw another team into the mix for this 4th spot. And by the way, we have to talk about Bama, and we will. But I'm going to throw in Florida State, along with everybody else in the country.
Sure.
Bill Connolly from ESPN on his returning production, Florida State's number 1. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the country coming back in Jordan Travis. They have one of the best edge rushers in the country coming back in Jared Verse. They've added guys in the portal. They had a step-up year a year ago. They feel like maybe they are returning to the Florida State of old, and it gets real right away for them because they open with LSU in Orlando on Sunday, September 3rd. And then week 4 is at Clemson. And so we're going to find out right away if Florida State is for real or not. Then it's Miami November 11th, and it's at Florida to end the season November 25th. There's going to be everybody's talking about Florida State in the same way because Verse coming back was such a big deal, because Jordan Travis was so good last year, because of the depth of talent that Mike Norvell has started to add there, and you can see it coming. And so I have Florida State as the ACC champ and my 4th team here. But, man, LSU and Clemson in September, that's as tough as anybody's September. So it gets real right away. And I don't know how much, when we were talking about these other top 4 programs the same way we're talking about them, I don't know how much wiggle room anybody has. I don't know if one-loss conference champ is going to get you in compared to the one-loss SEC runner-up compared to the one-loss loser of Ohio State, Michigan, if both those things happen. If you're the undefeated conference champ, you're going to be in ahead of those teams. But if those other losers in those games look great all year, and you're a one-loss conference champ, and yeah, the conference championship matters, but the committee actually thinks these other teams are better, I don't think Florida State has a lot of margin for error necessarily, but I think they're going to be good. So is Florida State on your radar?
Absolutely on my radar. The question for me is, I think that they have to beat both LSU and Clemson, and they can afford a loss somewhere else if they do that. But also because the ACC is moving away from divisional scheduling this year, so they're probably going to get Clemson again. Now, that helps if they lose that one game against Clemson, because then they can get it back. And if they win 1 of 2 against Clemson, that's probably enough. But yeah, they have to come out of the gates hot right away, because there aren't that many favors down the stretch of the season to kind of get them back into the mix. I mean, again, you're probably talking 2 top 10 teams in LSU in week 1 and Clemson in week 4. You're probably not playing another ranked team against maybe Wake Forest on October 28th. And that's a maybe. And that might be it. That might be the entire ranked section of your schedule. So you got to come out and make a statement early on. I think that if Florida State does make it, it has to be a situation where they win those 2 games early, jump up into being a top 4 team early in the year, and kind of just hang on for the ride, because it's not going to be easy. Now, I think they're absolutely capable of doing it. I think that they deserve very much to be in this conversation. I don't have them right now as one of the 4.
Okay, so let's talk about other candidates for the playoff before we finish with an Alabama discussion. I guess you have to include Clemson in there somewhere. They're kind of in the same place as Florida State if Cade Klubnik really has a great year and Garrett Riley as maybe the best offensive coordinator hire of the offseason. If he makes a huge difference, Dabo did not let last season rest. He made huge moves. So maybe Clemson is back to being Clemson. We don't know. I looked hard at the Pac-12 and I couldn't figure out what to do, mostly between Oregon and USC, maybe a little bit of Washington. So I punted. And then the Big 12, it just doesn't feel to me like there's somebody there. How did you look at Pac-12 and Big 12 playoff contenders?
So I don't see a team from the Big 12, but I felt that way last year, and TCU ended up being that team. So it's certainly possible that somebody steps up. Right now, all jokes aside, the team that I'd have as a Big 12 favorite would be Texas. And I think that they lose at Alabama and lose at least one more. I don't see a pathway to them only losing one game and making it all the way through the season that way. And I don't really see who could be that team that comes in and dominates from the start from the Big 12. So to me, the Big 12 isn't going to make the playoff next year. But again, I said that last year, and a team went 12-0 through the Big 12, which is something that hasn't happened in the round robin era. Pac-12 is interesting. So USC... First of all, I think the Pac-12 is going to be a great league next year at the top. Like they have a lot of really good teams. You mentioned USC and Oregon. You have to throw Utah in there. UCLA is going to be really interesting. Washington might be the most under the radar 11-2 team that I've ever seen in my life. Like they were awesome last year. And if they just didn't lose to an awful Arizona State team in like week 7 in just a weird 1-score game, then the Pac-12 championship game would have been USC versus Washington as a play into the college football playoff. It would have been. And so don't do that again, Washington. Don't pull that again. I think that Washington has a very real chance and a very real pathway to the playoff. I think that USC does as well. USC, though, their schedule is pretty difficult. They do play at Notre Dame versus Utah the very next week, versus Washington, at Oregon, versus UCLA. That's 5 potentially losable games versus I think last year, you were really looking at them having 2 or 3. Hell, I think that you have to throw Oregon State in there. Oregon State was a 10-win team that added a quarterback who I think is really going to make a difference for them. So,
but I think what you're saying is you have to throw them into the mix of good Pac-12 teams who are all going to beat each other up and nobody makes the playoff.
I think that there is definitely a way that happens. So I'm looking hard at Washington. So Washington, they go play at Michigan State. I think that's going to be a good sort of clout victory for them. I don't think Michigan State is going to be a whole lot better next year. They get Oregon at home. I like that. USC on the road. That's going to be a tough game. But then they get Utah at Oregon State. I think that they can survive it potentially. This is tough.
But let me ask you this. Beyond the schedule, because they're all going to play each other, who do you think the most talented team in the Pac-12 is going to be? Is it going to be USC? I didn't pick USC because I think their defense is still going to hold them back. I don't think Alex Grinch is the answer. Lincoln Riley supported him. I think he gets one more year, and then they're going to have to make a change. But I don't believe in that part of USC enough that I think the conference is tough enough that I don't think they're going to get there. But is USC the most talented team? I think Oregon's probably in that mix too. They lost a lot, but I kind of like what Dan Lanning's doing. Who's the most talented team regardless of schedule?
I think USC is the most talented team regardless of schedule. They have the Heisman winning quarterback. I think that they're going to be just as good at receiver. They're going to continue to improve, I think, on the offensive line. Defensively, look, year one was what it was. I do think they're going to continue to get better on that side. It's not going to be amazing. I'm not going to sit here and promise that, but I do think they'll be improved. The schedule is a lot harder this year, just because you do get rid of divisions. I mean, whenever they release the Pac-12 schedule, I stared at the top 5 or 6 teams in the Pac-12, and I was like, how do they all play each other? How does every good team in the Pac-12 play each other this year? Who did this? Whose idea was this? Because it's not going to help anybody out. I feel like somebody's going to come out of it, though. I just feel like there is going to be a Pac-12 team that comes through and finds a way to escape with only 1 loss. I wish I could tell you right this second.
So we're going to make our picks here. So we're talking this out. So let me run through the teams that we're considering. Bill Connolly is returning production, and this will lead us to the Alabama conversation. Florida State's number 1 in the nation in returning production. Michigan's 5.
Yeah.
USC is 14. Utah 16. Texas 19. Washington 22. Wisconsin, who we didn't really talk about, but we've liked as a dark horse, 27. LSU 32, Clemson 36, Notre Dame 44, Ohio State 48, Oregon State 53, Oregon 54, Penn State 56, Tennessee 69, Oklahoma 77, Georgia 80th in returning production. That's 109th in offense and 42nd in defense. And 125th in returning production is Alabama. So what does that mean? This is the dominant team of this era of college football. They have made 7 of 9 playoffs. We are an hour into a playoff prediction show in March, and we have barely talked about them. I do not have them in my playoff, mostly because I did not allow myself to pick Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan. If I really think to myself, who's going to win an Alabama-Georgia SEC title game, I think it might be Alabama. But Georgia's path to that game is so easy. And I'm thinking about Texas in week 2, where it's a young starter for Alabama versus Quinn Ewers with a year under his belt for Texas. I'm thinking about having to play LSU. I'm thinking about the things Alabama has to do. I think Alabama has a better chance than Georgia of getting tripped up on the way there. So how are you thinking about Bama as a playoff contender?
They're really hard. I mean, heading into last year, I think that you just had to, at least I felt like you had to default them. You had to default that, oh, well, they're going to be just as good. They're going to be a playoff team because that's what they had been for so many years. I think that last year kind of broke that stranglehold in some ways. I don't think that Alabama is a team that you kind of have to mentally pencil in anymore, because we saw a really good Alabama team that couldn't do it. And that looked like a really good team, but a normal, really good team, and not some otherworldly being floating above the rest of the earth. And now, like you said, they lose so much on both sides of the ball. I don't necessarily know who their stars are going to be next year. I think that they've had a lot of issues developing that wide receiver position in the past couple of years. So I don't have a ton of confidence that whoever comes in at quarterback is guaranteed to be as good as Bryce Young. Defensively, I think that it'll probably be better in some ways. I think that they're going to get back to fundamentals a little bit under Kevin Steele. And I do think that they could put together a very exciting run-based offense behind Jalen Milroe. So they have a pathway, but their floor is so much lower than what it is in normal years. And for that reason, I just can't assume that it's going to happen, especially when they do play so many difficult games, I think, early in the year.
Okay. My playoff: 1 Michigan, 2 Georgia, 3 Ohio State, 4 Florida State. Time for you. We talked it out the best we could. It's March, but I think it's a worthy conversation, and we'll see what changes maybe early May once we get through spring football. Give me your 4 teams right now, Shehan.
Number 1, I'll go Georgia. Number 2, I'll go Michigan. Number 3, I'm going to go with Washington. I think that they find a way to make it out, and I think they will be improved in Kalen DeBoer's second season, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And at number 4, I'm going to go with Ohio State. I think that Michigan wins the game, but Ohio State is 11-1 and kind of similar to last year, backdoors their way in.
So that would set up for you a Georgia-Ohio State semifinal rematch and a Michigan-Washington semifinal. For me, it would set up Michigan-Florida State in a semifinal and Georgia-Ohio State in another semifinal. We're both picking a Georgia-Ohio State rematch. I will tell you, in March, I'm thinking hard about an Ohio State-Michigan national championship game. We were, however close we were a year ago to that. We didn't get either of them. We weren't far away from getting both of them. And I think the circumstances to create that remain and perhaps are enhanced. And we also might get a Georgia-Alabama national championship game. I don't know, but we need to see. It's why we're doing it now. We need to see what the quarterback battles at Georgia and Alabama look like this spring. How they play, how people talk about them, who takes the lead. We might be here in 6 weeks being like, oh, I can't believe we ever thought that, because something has happened in those quarterback battles. And so that's what we talked about on the pod earlier this week. But I like doing this. I like talking about the playoff, man.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We should do a show about it. What chance is there any chance, I guess I'll phrase it as, that Penn State plays spoiler? Is there any chance that this top 2 stranglehold of the Big Ten gets thrown into whack?
I think Penn State is building something. Get back to me in 2024 in year 2 of Drew Aller as the starting quarterback at Penn State, because they're going to have they figured out some offensive line stuff, and they usually have skill guys, and their defense is pretty good, and they do have guys coming back this year. Fashanu at left tackle is a big deal, right? They have some of the best linebackers in the country. They have, Kalen King at corner had a great year last year. Penn State has some really good players. They have a very tough path. And I think it's one of these situations where get Penn State into the playoff as a 7 seed in 2024 with Drew Aller at quarterback, and then let's see what happens, right? But are they going to do what they need to do and beat both Ohio State and Michigan? When I'm talking about an Ohio State-Michigan national championship game, does Penn State have to beat both of them to get in a position to make the playoff? They certainly have to beat one. Do they have to beat both?
I think what becomes interesting is a scenario that I don't think is out of the question, where Penn State beats Michigan, Michigan beats Ohio State beats Penn State. And now I think it's very unlikely that then all 3 of those teams would just win every other game. I think that that's probably how it would work itself out. But I mean, I think that it would throw a lot of question for everybody if that were to happen. I don't think that anybody would totally know what to do if those 3 teams all look similar caliber.
Yeah, then you're talking about who wins the tiebreaker to get in the Big Ten championship game. You're talking about, again, Ohio State with that opportunity against Notre Dame in the non-conference might have an edge there. But yeah, it could get real messy. That is not impossible at all. And they've kind of avoided situations like that. But it could get very real very quick, because, again, I think we all agree Penn State was probably like the 8th best team in the country last year. They only lost to Ohio State, Michigan. And if they're more like the 5th, if they're like the more like the 5th or 6th best team in the country this year, they jump up and get somebody, and all of a sudden now you're talking about a playoff discussion. You might have 3 of the 6 best teams in the country in the same division, not just in the same conference, but in the same division. And in the SEC, no matter what right now, that's not going to happen, because Alabama and Georgia are on different sides. So they might have 3 of the best 6 teams, but it's not going to be in the same division, which just allows it to be a little less complicated. So plenty of time to talk about all this. We appreciate you guys indulging us on a playoff discussion in March. We'll let spring football play out. We'll come back and do this again. For now, make sure you're reading Shehan at CBS Sports. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any episodes. And for Shehan Jeyarajah, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was the College Football Survivor Show. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.